Hi everybody, I'm Richard Davis. I'm a composer and producer and the developer of the new Control series for MetaGrid Pro. Now, the Control series is a suite of tools made to support specific instrument libraries and virtual instruments. In each edition, we'll have some common features and also some unique ones that address common use cases of the library that it's made for. The first release is the Cinematic Studio Strings Edition, and among other things that it provides, it addresses the issue of offsets. This library is made to have some rise time at the beginning of each note to preserve the full attack of a sound, so if you were to quantize it, or if it were otherwise on the grid, it would sound late. Your options are to bump it a little earlier, or compensate in performance, or to have a lot of tracks, each one with a different negative track delay. I wanted to make that a little simpler to use so a composer can have more time to apply nuance and just get through their music. So here's a quick walkthrough to show you a few things that you can do with the Control Series Cinematic Studio Strings Edition. We can start with a little step entry. So I'm going to set the quantize to a bar so I can easily drop my cursor, and then I'll set it to 16th notes. I'll choose spiccato articulation, and I'll turn on step input. All right, there's no track offset on this track, so what we hear is going to be just what you would hear straight off the grid. This is just a little illustration to show you why track offsets are often set, to basically put short notes a little closer in to where they should be, but I'm going to set this sequence to a -70 track offset. And clearly there's a lot of uneven velocity in there. So one thing we can do is, with everybody selected, we can make everybody pianissimo. And then we can select notes on quarters and make those forte, and then the tiniest touch of pre-roll. Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit of an experiment with articulations. We're going to turn everybody into pizzicatos. And then we're going to take all the notes that are on quarters and turn those into Bartok pits. And then I'll select everybody again, and then select all the eighth notes, and then select notes not on quarters. And that gives me every other eighth note, and we will make all of those colegno. And we're going to boost those a little bit because they always are a little soft when put up next to the other stuff. And then we will see where we are. All right, well, the first thing I want is for this first note to be an octave down, and let's listen to those colegnos. Okay, well, among other things, the colegnos are still a little ahead, and I'm going to fix that by the same technique of selecting all eighth notes and then notes that aren't on quarters, and then I'll give them their offset. And let's see if that gets us where we want to be timing-wise by adding a drum loop to that. The Control series has some unique ways of approaching a few things about the Cinematic Studio strings. One of them is that in addition to retaining the legatos that you are familiar with, it also divides them up into their component legato transition speeds. So, expressive fast, medium, slow, and portamento, and low latency fast, medium, and portamento. And the benefit of this is in making a performance consistent. You can use this on a played-in track and just kind of force it to be fast legatos in spots and mediums in another, whatever is appropriate to make that phrase work. I've also added a couple of combo articulations to this set. There's a dynamic sforzando and a tremolo sforzando. The dynamic sforzando is a sustain with a short attack added to it. And this is very useful if you need to match a very specific dynamic contour for a picture, or if you need to have a very specific musical moment occur. The tremolo sforzando is the same idea. There is a short that's attached to it, and so it can either give definition to the beginning of the tremolo, or you can do a sforzando tremolo attack. The dynamics of these two are controlled in two different ways. The shorts are controlled with velocity, and the sustain portion is controlled with the CC. To demonstrate the legato offset feature, first I'm going to capture a simple melody. Okay, so we're in the editor now, and I've quantized all this so that the grid adjustments will have meaning. And the first thing that we can do is we can hit play. And of course it's late, it would be, there's nothing wrong with that. So why don't we assign it an articulation, expressive fast? I love that you can do that with just one tap. And by the way, if I tap it again, it's unassigned. And then if I could make it expressive medium, or I could just go back to fast, it's just very, very simple to do. So anyway, now that I've settled on fast, I can hit my offset button and tap the expressive fast again, and at that point it moves the first note one amount and the subsequent notes a different amount so that everybody is in time. Okay, and now we might want to change a couple of notes to portamentos. I'm just going to choose two. I think these will do. And I'm going to go over and hit subsequent. And I've got my reverse offset going so that if I tap expressive fast, it'll move it back to where it was to begin with. All right, and then I will go back, and these will be subsequent notes as well because they're in the middle of a phrase, and so I'm going to change these to portamento notes, and I do that here. And again, because these are notes in the middle of a phrase, they're subsequent notes, so I will move them like subsequent notes, and then they're moved into place. Now, portamento requires that the velocity be between 0 and 20. So there are a couple of different ways we can get there. I can draw it in. I can go over here and type it in, but I'll just drag it down real quick and put it fairly low so the effect will be pronounced. Now, because the velocity changes the speed of the portamento, there's always going to be some adjustment here. So let's just go ahead and go through it. That sounds pretty good, actually, but if we wanted to move it earlier, we could certainly bump it a little bit earlier. We could certainly use the position buttons in MetaGrid Pro, and so we have this. And there you have it. One other thing we might do to add a little bit more expressiveness to this, and obviously we'll do dynamics and things, but I think we also might want to add a little vibrato. And for that purpose, I have created something of a shortcut. In any of the offset grids that you have, in any of these with the light blue buttons that are lit, you will see 3 buttons on the far right-hand side, and those buttons are 3 different vibrato amounts, and that's because the library has 3, senza, regular or con vibrato, and molto. And essentially what you're doing when you're applying vibrato with the controller is you're crossfading between those. And that's 100% fine. We could just do an overdub and record that move if we wanted to. But sometimes there's an advantage, and it's also kind of fun just to do it like this. So I'm going to start off in Senza, and I'm going to turn off the click once it starts playing. If you do it like this, it's very easy to make changes and you know exactly what you're getting. By the way, this is the reason why I've included the toggle CC curve type right here as a macro, because you'll be switching back and forth between ramp CCs and step CCs, and these are step CCs. Also, we can take a look up here at some of the macros. We've got a collection of them. Make legato is pretty much the same thing as the Cubase command. It's just handy when you're moving things around. You need to make everything a little bit longer. It's a very quick and easy way to do that. We've got velocity dynamics, and velocity dynamics is there because if I were starting this process out and I had no controller data at all, considering that this is a legato patch, so it needs a CC to make it do anything, one thing that I could do is, let's say that this first note, if I set it to fortissimo and then I tap velocity dynamics, it just makes the controller line there. It's just a shortcut so that you won't be hearing nothing. Some other macros are add note at selected, which is for essentially if you've got a note right here and you tap add note at selected and then tap the up or down arrow on your keyboard, you've made a duplicate of that note. So if you're writing parts, this is just a quick way to get there. For more details on these macros and their applications, you can check out the manual. It's got a lot of detail, a lot of examples of practical use cases for all of these different things. The last thing that I'll show you here right now is the pre-roll button, and it's different from pre-roll as used typically in Cubase because this pre-roll button is an editor's pre-roll, and what that means is that it's meant to operate on a smaller scale. It's meant to do specific things just so you can make sure that note transition worked, that a dynamic thing worked or something like that. So if you actually go and edit the pre-roll, if you take a look at it, you'll see that it's a list of commands that are specifically oriented at these smaller tasks. Little moves to put edits into perspective, just enough for that. What that looks like in practice is if I'm working on that note and I tap pre-roll, it just bumps me back enough so that I can tell if that legato transition worked. And it does, so that's kind of handy. Now you can set those to anything that you want, but this brings up an interesting point, which is that the control series is a collection of grids, and it's not just the instrument grids, it's also supporting grids for each of those. So it's 4 times 6, it's 24 grids. And it would be kind of ridiculous to expect a user to make that change 24 times in 24 grids. It would just be nuts. And that is one of the reasons why I've built macro editing functionality across all grids into the GridIron application that comes with the control series, and that is what I'm going to be showing you next. One of the challenges that comes with setting up a system like Control Series is that you use a lot of grids and they have some common features, and you want those features to be uniform across the entire system, and that's part of why I designed GridIron. GridIron is the installer for your grids when you're first getting started. And it allows you to edit all of the offsets for all of the articulations for each instrument in the library, and it also lets you change the commonly used macros across all grids so that they all agree with each other and you're not having to change one thing 24 times. Quickly, let's take a look at the installer. All you have to do is you want to select who you're generating for, that's Cubase or Nuendo, and you want to select the library and you want to choose your primary track offset. That's the one you commonly use in Cubase. If you don't use one, I suggest you try it. It's really great. And if you do, you can enter in any value here that you want. Some people use -70, some use -80. It just depends on what you like to work with. And then you'll want to have exported a copy of the main workspace that you use in MetaGrid Pro. That's the one that has all of your grids, that go with your template and that kind of thing. And when you select that workspace and you load it in here, when you generate the installation, it's going to install 24 grids into your workspace, so you don't have to copy 24 grids in. And that means that when you import this new workspace back into your system, and it says new at the beginning so you can tell it apart from the original one, when you load that up and you select a track that you've imported from the launch project, of course, dynamic focus tracking will take you right to the correct grids. So let's take a quick look at the offset editor. Again, to start this, you need to select the library you're going to be working on and the version. And then you choose your track offset, which is going to be 70 for me. And then when we page down, we see a table. This table has every articulation in the library and also every instrument in the library. And you can make different offsets for different instruments and different articulations, as I've discovered that sometimes things want a slightly different setting. If you decide, for instance, that expressive fast legato needs to be different in the basses, which would not be surprising, you can change it that way. And that's the way I have it set up. These are the defaults that come with the grids that you're going to be loading. And the great part about this is, if you don't agree with them or if they don't work on your system for various reasons, please change them. They are made to be changed. The whole idea of this being an open beta means that I want to reach a group consensus of what the real offsets are for these instruments and these articulations. Of course, while you're doing all this, you might want to save your progress, and it saves a little file into the downloads folder. It's date stamped and time stamped, and you'll be able to come back to whatever changes you might make at any point. And when you're done making all those changes, you page down to the bottom and you can generate a new set of grids, and you can also insert them into a copy of the user workspace, just as you did when you installed initially. And if you import them into a workspace that already has another version of them, like say for instance, you decided to change the track offset that you're using, GridIron can figure out that it needs to get rid of those and replace them with new ones. And so it'll do that while not changing anything else that you have in there. One last thing to look at is the macro editor, and the macro editor allows you to make changes to the macros that are common to all of the grids. So across all 24 grids of this particular package, the velocity arrows you'll probably want to be the same. So you can make changes here. These are just my values because generally 2 is sufficient and 1 is a lot of taps, but you can do it any way that you want. Also, the key editor button that opens the key editor window can also be set to open the score editor and so forth, just like you can see here. You can also place 2 user macros in here. Now, these macros can be any Cubase command that exists. They're the same commands that you get to in MetaGrid Pro. So you can just start typing up here, and then you can come over here and see all of your options and choose the one that you want. Also, you can edit the position arrows with different values, and when you do so, the display of MetaGrid Pro will change. The name of the button will be visible, and your values will be there instead of the ones that are set now. And now we get to the pre-roll, which is a sequence of up to 10 commands that you can use to set up your pre-roll any way you like. Of course, you can save your progress down here at the bottom as well, and when you're all done with that, go back to the offset page, do your generation, insert it into your user workspace, and import it back into MetaGrid Pro, and you are off and running. The Control Series project has definitely been a labor of love for me, and it began with a desire to make control surfaces that looked inviting, looked like something you'd want to touch, and that would have features that we would all want to use. Just being able to select articulations with a single button and assign them is a big deal to me. It's a big time saver, and it keeps me in the flow of what I want to do. All I have to do is tap a button and it's done. It's my plan to keep adding things like this, solving problems and creating environments hopefully conducive to creativity and speed, so we can get the most out of our libraries and our time And I hope the Control series helps other composers out. I use it every day. It makes a lot of things go faster for me. And I hope it'll do the same for you. There's a lot more to come. The Control Series Cinematic Studio Strings Edition is available now in the MetaGrid Pro app. Thank you for watching.